Thank you, and it's really nice to be here. I like Philadelphia, but I've never been to this facility before, and it looks really nice, and it's certainly a nice occasion, as far as I'm concerned, to talk about Abbas Kiarostami. I assume in this group I'm talking to some people that know his work somewhat, and some maybe who don't know it and are just being introduced to it by this series. One thing to sort of note about his rise to this renown is that I started writing a lot about international cinemas when I started out as a critic in the 80s. Probably no one had ever heard the name of Abbas Kiarostami in 1990 in the New York film world. And yet, at the end of the decade, at the end of 1999, Film Comment polled the critics of the United States, and he was voted the most important director of the 1990s. So from being completely unknown to being considered the top director in the world is a pretty remarkable thing. I don't know if there's any sort of comparable rise, unless you think of maybe Jean-Luc Godard in the 60s or something like that. But Kiarostami really did have a remarkable rise. But at the same time, a lot of people still don't know his work or his name in the United States. Kiarostami died in 2016. Very bad medical situation. And he wasn't that old. He was just 76. It was very sad, but it made me start thinking about wanting to write some more things about his work and trying to do something to help shape his legacy, as it were. One of the things I thought about was that looking backwards at that point, it seemed to me that his career, roughly 45 years long, divided roughly into three periods of 15 years each. And the first period I call the Kanun period. Kanun is what Iranians called the Center for the Intellectual Development of Children and Young Adults, which was and is an organization under the government that was under the Shah's regime, was set up there, but was continued by the Islamic Republic. And in 1970, when he was 30 years old, Kiarostami was invited to start a filmmaking division at Kanun, which had mainly been concerned with publishing things for children and young adults. And so he did, and he made films from then for basically the next 20 years under the ban. Most of his films were under the banner of Kanun, and a lot of them concerned children. And The Traveler is the first feature he made, and that's a film that has a lot of the characteristics of his work, especially his work with children. For me, that period ends about 1985, and the period that follows it, the second period, I call the Masterworks period, because that contains basically all the films that made Kiarostami world famous, beginning with Where's the Friend's House in 1986, which is the last film that he made centered on a child, although it was the first film that launched him into world fame. Is about a little boy trying to return his schoolmate's notebook after school. And that was the first of what became known as the Coker trilogy. It's known that way because Where's the Friend's House was shot in a village several hours to the north of Tehran called Coker. And then in 1990, on the eve of Kiarostami's 50th birthday, Coker was destroyed by an earthquake that killed like 60,000 people or so in that region, and including a lot of children. And Kiarostami wanted to see if the children who had been in Where's the Friend's House had survived, so he got in a car and he drove through this devastated area. And then a year later, he was at a film festival in Germany and told the story of having done that. And someone said, well, why don't you go make a film about that? That's a really interesting thing. So he decided to do that. So he fictionalized that in the film, and Life Goes On, about a film director who's never given a name, driving through the devastated area to try to find the children. The next film, Through the Olive Trees, is a film about the making of And Life Goes On. And he has a non-actor playing the fictional version of himself, and then that actor reappears in Through the Olive Trees, and he has another actor play the director of And Life Goes On. So it's like one thing growing out of another. It's sort of this meta-cinematic thing about cinema, and it's about various things in Iranian life. And then the two remaining films in the period that I call the Masterworks period are Taste of Cherry in 1997 and The Wind Will Carry Us in 1999. And Taste of Cherry is, I think, my favorite of his films, and has been called the greatest Iranian film ever made. The period that comes after that, the third period, I call the experimental period. And that's a little funny in the sense that artists of any sort, they start out experimental and then they get sort of more and more conventional as they go along. Nothing, pejorative about conventional, but they expand their range to get to greater audiences. And I think in Kiarostami's case, this is my reading from having known him and having become very good friends with him actually over the years, that he got to a point after winning the Palme d'Or at Cannes and after winning the Silver Leopard at Venice, where he sort of was tired of that, of the spotlight being so directly shone on him in this way. And so he kind of withdrew more into a situation like he was in Kanun, where he didn't really have a lot of people paying a lot of attention to him. He could do pretty much anything he wanted. In Shireen, he has all these actresses, dozens of them, shown in close-up that you're seeing all their emotional reactions to this very emotional play, but they were actually not seeing the play at all or hearing the play. They were being told by Kiarostami what they were supposed to be doing, and it's a meditation on women's faces and emotion and sort of the difference between sound and image, and again, an experimental film to me. And then in the last film that's being shown, 24 Frames, which was actually completed after his death by his son Ahmed, it's basically a computer animated film that you see 24 different little 4-minute segments. These films are really wonderful. The reason that this series is here now is that after Kiarostami died in 2016, the next year at the Cannes Film Festival, there was a deal set up for all of these earlier films of Kiarostami's to be the original elements to be taken and restored by the company MK2 in France and Criterion Collection here in the United States. And so that 2-year effort has resulted in virtually all of his films being restored. It's a pleasure to me to see these come out because I've known these films myself for a long time, but they've been virtually never shown outside of Iran. So it's very exciting to be able to say to people that are Kiarostami fans that have never seen these films, come out and see these. You're going to love these.